On this episode of the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, we're breaking down the breakdowns. We're going to talk about what happens when deficiencies come up at camp.
Ever feel like you're carrying camp on your shoulders? Staff, parents, the budget, all while trying to keep the ministry central? This is Travis Allison from Go Camp Pro. Please visit camp.mba/sacred to take the free Resilient Camp Blueprint Diagnostic.
Jared here. We want to let you know quick that our book is on sale. The Sacred Playgrounds book is on sale, and we'll tell you how to get that. If you are listening to this live in this last week in November here, you can get this book at a 50% discount. We'll tell you the details partway through the episode. Welcome to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. We're behind the mic and behind the research, turning insights into impact and numbers into North Stars for camping ministries and the intrepid leaders that serve them. Each episode blends thoughtful theology, compelling data, and actionable wisdom, all to help camps thrive today, tomorrow, and for years to come. I'm your host and producer, Jared Rendell, Director of Innovation and Communication for Sacred Playgrounds. Joining me is Director and Lead Researcher, Jake Sorensen, a PhD-level scholar, experienced ministry practitioner, and the founder of Sacred Playground. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode, the support button to help make these episodes happen, and connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at Sacred Playgrounds, and always at sacredplaygrounds.com. Explore with us what God might have in store at your Sacred Playground. Welcome to the playground, everyone. Jake, my friend, hello, welcome home.
Thank you. It is good to be home. It's a long trip, a couple conferences, saw some family, saw some friends, and now we're back into the swing of things.
Right? You really stacked things up there. So when we're recording this, we're just kind of a week and some change off of the OM3 Great Gathering. If you missed it, we did a live episode from there with some camp leader voices. Underneath that, what we didn't know is that Jake and his wife Anna on our team, well, you guys are really just straight gone from home for a couple weeks, right? Because Anna contributed to the planning team, and so they were there early. Plus, we had this great Campwell gathering. There's more to come on that and what's going on with Campwell soon. And then we had the conference. And then you guys got to high-five some family for a minute, but also on the way to some ACA character at camp grant advisory team work. So you guys were just gone. It was just stacked up.
Yeah, had a great time. Went to the Southeast ACA conference as well, and I got to shake hands and have breakfast with Michael Brandwine, which is always a treat. And he's got so much wisdom to share always. And
Awesome.
Some of our camp colleagues on the Character at Camp team. So that's an exciting initiative and something that we continue to lean into as well. We had that episode a while back on Character at Camp, and we'll continue to lean into that because it's such an important piece of our industry and what we do in camp.
Amen. All right, everyone, here's the plan for the day. Hopefully you saw the title. We're breaking down breakdowns on this episode. And camp's great. We know this. Camp's great. Camp's really powerful. We talk about that all the time on here, and thankfully there's a lot of data to support camp's incredible impact. And we know that things can break down sometimes. And it's been really interesting to discover and uncover those things over the years of effective camp projects. And it's kind of how we think about those things is kind of morphed over the years. So we're gonna talk through that. We're gonna walk through that. But part of the point is this, right? Sometimes issues crop up at camp. Sometimes things happen at camp, right? And the ways that we often find out about those things are things like an angry email or phone call from a parent because this thing happened with their kiddo, with their camper. This thing happened, that thing happened. And whether it's maybe a survey or like I said, they reach out with an email or a phone call, that's how we find out. And then we often deal with that thing specifically, right? Here is this thing, we fix this one thing, and that's about it often. And part of what's been valuable with these effective camp projects and talking about those things and looking at them through the lens of the 5 fundamentals is that, one, we sometimes find some things that are hidden. that we're not necessarily getting a whole bunch of emails about. But where it comes out is in camper and parent satisfaction ratings and frequency of certain behaviors and evidence of certain outcomes and all of that. That's where those things are kind of hidden sometimes, where maybe there is some deficiency in the experience and the outcomes at camp, and we don't necessarily know it. But we sure like to, right? Want to do better. I mean, we talk about this in coaching, right? Like you've coached some things before. I talk with my players about how much we learn from failure, how much we learn from the things that are hard, right? We tell them, don't waste a loss, right? The only time you waste a loss, the only time you waste a mistake, the only time you waste a failure is if you don't learn from it. And you sure can't if you don't know about it, right? And so it's
Absolutely
kind of a
true.
similar concept here.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Jared, and I think that's a good analogy as you talk about sports. The difference here is, do we know that we are failing? And that becomes one of the questions. So we can sometimes see it or hear it when we hear from a specific camper or a specific parent that calls angry and upset. But if we're not really taking a look at the experience in a robust way, we might not know where the deficiencies lie. We've got a lot of camps that are still doing things that they've been doing for the last 20, 30 years and assuming that things are going well, and hearing from people
No news is good news.
that a lot of things are going well. And meanwhile, there are some kids that are struggling at their camp, and there are specific reasons why. There are best practices that we need to lean into. We've talked about the 5 fundamentals, and we lean into the 5 fundamentals because we can see that they really do matter for the experience itself. And we can identify areas of deficiency. We can say, what happened with this child's experience? Why isn't this child coming back to camp this next summer? Unless you're calling every single child, which, for smaller camps, I hope you are doing that. If a child's not coming back, figuring out why that is the case, because there might be something that you haven't heard about. But doing a deeper dive into what are some of the specifics of these experiences? What does it mean when an experience is deficient? And what are the consequences of that? Because there are multiple consequences to a deficient experience at camp.
That's the other thing that gets uncovered when we take this deeper, more robust look, right? Is we can see the difference that it makes in the outcomes.
Absolutely.
Not in these things that matter, which means it's missional. Like approaching these breakdowns, approaching potential deficiencies is part of meeting our mission. It's part of doing what we're called to do.
Yes, absolutely.
So we're going to break it down. We're going to break it down today. Before we do that, can we hit our quick camp question?
I'm all yours.
Quick camp question.
All right, our quick camp question today. Man, I almost forgot. And it's a doozy too. So we're just, we're just keeping it.
Let's keep it nice and light today, right?
Let's keep it nice and light. So this is one of this great slate of questions that we had from our post-summer 2025 Pulse Check survey. Here's what it says. Is camp headed the way of other industries where camps that can offer more grow larger, while smaller denominational mom and pop type camps close up shop because they aren't able to compete? Is camp going that direction? We regularly, like, You've Got Mail is one of my wife's favorites, right? She kind of wants to be Kathleen Kelly. She kind of wants to be the mom and pop shop around the corner.
Shop around the corner.
Maybe that's why. That's why I was looking at this question. But
sure.
But it's a great question.
No, it is really a great question, and it can sometimes feel like we're Sisyphus pushing that stone up the hill, and it just keeps falling back upon us when we are just one person at a camp trying to do it all. The reality is that there's a lot to be done, and this is a hard industry that we're in, and doing it by yourself is not a recipe for success. And so I don't want to say definitely yes to this question, because there are successful models for doing camp on a smaller scale and doing it very, very well. And we've seen this in the data, where there are small camps that their numbers are steady. They're able to pay their bills. They've got their staff scaled correctly. It's a difficult thing to scale your staff correctly. And sometimes we think, we've got to add more staff. And sometimes it's about adding volunteers. It's about being creative in the ways that we do staff certain positions, and different ways about how we run camp. And so it's not that small camps cannot make it. Small camps can absolutely make it. Are they more vulnerable? The answer is yes. And we see that in the data. when camps have a larger team of people, losing one person to retirement or moving on to a different camp,
Right.
things like that, it doesn't affect the entire camp as much as it does when a longtime director of a very small camp moves on, right? So there's more vulnerabilities inherent in those things. At a larger camp, they can also potentially afford some of the larger apparatus and some of those things that get people excited. They can afford
Mhm.
more marketing, things like that. And so when we did the Outdoor Mystery Connection Directors Survey, we could see that in the camps that had a lower annual budget, they were struggling more with fundraising and donations than the camps with a higher budget. So the ones that had budgets over $1 million
Mhm.
or over $2 million, they were much more likely to say that fundraising was up from the previous year
Mhm.
than camps that had the smaller annual budgets of, let's say, $250,000 or less. And so we can really see it in the data that yes, some of the smaller camps are struggling. Is that something that's a foregone conclusion? Absolutely not. We've got great examples of smaller camps, that is camps with a budget of under 500,000, that are doing very well, and their camper numbers are stable. They've got a good business model, but it can be more challenging to get those things in place with some of the smaller camps.
Yeah. So two potential what do we do if we're in that boat things, right? The camp that I did some interim work at was on that smaller side, and on that, uh, some of the things we were trying to put in place, and some of the things that I think these smaller camps can put in place are, one, this idea of a noticeably improved experience, noticeably improved product. Right? We've talked about that on here before. The idea that when you do one intentional thing that folks will notice around your experience, that's something a lot of times we can do. We can do one thing, right? We might not build a water slide at camp, but we can do this one thing that people are going to notice. And two, I think the future for smaller camps is highly partnered, highly partnered with maybe three groups. One, churches. Yes, we talk about that on here a lot. Two, other outside organizations, especially youth focused. If you're youth focused camp, other youth focused organizations, highly creatively partnered. And then three is with other larger camps in the area, connected denominationally or not, to get creative about doing some things together. So we could talk a lot about all of that,
Yeah,
but
I mean
that's helpful. It's a deep question.
the other thing that I would definitely want to say, especially as we talk through this episode of deficiencies and things like that, is that you have an opportunity when you have a smaller camp to really dive into the specific experience of specific campers. When you've got 50 or fewer campers on site at once, you can give them more special attention. It can be a closer knit group, and that can actually be a benefit to the experience and to the outcomes. Whereas at some of these larger camps that I've been to, I've been there and I've seen the kids on the margins, the kids that just get forgotten because they've got 300 kids or 400 kids playing capture the flag at the same time in the dark. And there are kids that just get lost and get left out. And there's not enough counselors
Mm-hmm.
paying attention to that and that dynamic because they're so focused on the large group. And so I'm a big believer in decentralized ministry, small group ministry, and at smaller camps, you are able to do that
Mm-hmm.
more intentionally than some of the larger camps. And so lean into those strengths, and people will keep coming back because they believe in you and your camp, and you are having a positive impact on their lives.
Amen. Thanks, Jake. All right, here we go. We're coming back into breaking down the breakdowns. Let's talk through this kind of what we look at, what we get to when we work with a camp. We get to a spot like part of their report, right? In effective camp power camp, especially, and these things come in a few other spots. We are looking at these breakdowns, and we look at these breakdowns through a lens of the 5 fundamentals, like you referred to, and we break them down each of them. And there are different questions that lean in, and then we end up kind of stratifying these things as 3. You can talk more about this, but a robust experience, a marginal experience, or a deficient experience, and then we can see the consequences from there. So let's talk folks through that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, part of this came out of the very original project when we were looking at the camper experience from both the camper's perspective and the parent's perspective. And we use this number on the podcast over and over again because it's one of my favorites. It's the 97% number, right? It's the 97% agree my camper had a good time, or 97% of the campers agree I had a fun at camp. And so we see that it's a high percentage of campers that are having a positive experience overall, at least when they answer that fun question. And we see that 97% come up again and again in some of the other statistics too about related to positive experiences. And so when we first started doing this quantitatively, that is with surveys, we said we got to have a large data set, because if we want to say anything or dive into these deficient experiences, we need at least 1,000 campers to do this, because 3% of 1,000 is 30. So we need at least that many to say anything with any sort of reliability about this camper experience that might be deficient in some way.
Right.
What's going on with these campers that aren't having fun at camp, right? What are some of the things that are breaking down, as you said? And so that's what we're trying to measure when we do this with the Effective Camp Project and the Power of Camp study with our friends at 3CA. You know, now we've surveyed over 30,000 campers, and so we've got a lot of data. We've got a really good idea about what happens with these deficiencies. And what we see is that it's not just these campers had a great experience and these campers didn't have a great experience. It's much more nuanced than that, right?
Mm-hmm.
They might still say, oh yeah, I had fun, but it wasn't quite the same as in previous years. And here's why. And so one of the things we can see this from the parents as they talk about their child's camp experience. And so, you know, sometimes we get the angry parent that calls and they tell us, you know, the horror story, right? We've all heard these horror stories, and we try to fix those things. Sometimes we fire a summer staff member because of something that happened, an incident. But the ones that we're really looking for with these data points are things that are really on the edges. You're not going to get a phone call for this, right? But we want to know about it because it affects the experience. And so here's one from this past summer from a parent whose daughter came to camp, and they had been to camp multiple years. And so the parent writes, my daughter has always been thrilled to go to camp. She had made lifelong friends. This year, due to a family reunion, we arrived a few hours late. She said the girls were very cliquey, and the girls she had been friends with for years blew her off. They didn't include her in group photos and such. She felt like an outsider at her happiest place. Let me read that again. She felt like an outsider at her happiest place. When I asked her about talking with the other girls, she said she felt it would have made things worse for her at camp. So she just kept her mouth shut. And she went through the experience and didn't bring it up. And so this isn't something you're going to get a phone call about. And what actually happened, as part of this comment, the mother actually says she'll be back. She actually wants to do the leader in training program at your camp, but something was off, and that it's the relational characteristic of camp broke down for this girl. And so her happiest place, she's looking forward to it. She's looking forward to being with the same friends that she was at in previous years. And the only reason you hear about this is you ask, right? And so what we can find in the camper data is that it's not just this one girl here. We can kind of measure this with some of the other kids when we ask things like, did you feel like you belonged in your group?
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel like you had to hide your true self? Because this girl wasn't able to actually express that she was feeling left out. She felt like she couldn't do that.
Yeah. Let me give another example.
Please.
Here's what it says. My daughter has attended camp for 3 years now and has always loved it. She has said the food was great, but this year she spent the whole week hungry. She never got enough to eat. The food she did eat was not as good. No kid should ever have to worry about being hungry, and if they will get enough to eat, especially while they're at Bible camp. Charge more if you need to. Tell the parents to pack snacks for their kids if you need to, but no kid should ever leave mealtime still hungry or worried if they'll ever have enough.
Yeah. We hear this at other camps too, right? So food prices are going up, and so we're skimping in different ways. You know, it's not as good, but how does that affect the experience? That gives you a sense of how it might affect the experience.
So similarly, right? Like, this person's probably coming back. They're coming back again. They're going to assume they'll do it. They've been there for years. They loved it. But we should know this, this thing from this year that did have her coming back, and they're on the ride home. This incredibly important part, and she's saying, "Oh, it was great, but can we stop for a snack? Because I'm
Right.
kind of hungry.
So that one would have agreed that she had fun, right?
But confidently.
Yeah. So she agrees that she has fun, but this part of the experience suffered because of that. And what does that mean for some of the other pieces of the experience? And so we can kind of measure that in the effective camp project. And so we have our 5 fundamentals, and for each of those, we ask a series of questions in the camper survey, and based on those, we give sort of a scale, a measurement scale. And they fall on one end of the scale or the other, or somewhere in the middle. And rather than just say they had a breakdown in the experience, we say on this end of the scale, we know that they had a robust experience. We can be very confident they had a robust experience in the participatory aspect of camp, in the faith-centered aspect of camp. On the other side of the scale, we can say something really happened here. It's a clear breakdown. We would say it's deficient. There was a deficiency in the unplugged from home characteristic, the relational characteristic in the case of the one that I read. And then there's kind of this gray area in the middle. Because when we do survey research, how are we answering these questions? It's imprecise in some ways. And so we've got this middle category where we say it's marginal. Some of those kids would say, yes, I did have a great time. Some of those kids would say, yeah, it wasn't the same. It just didn't feel like camp. And that is where we really got into kind of this understanding of when the experience breaks down. When the kids would say in our focus groups, it just didn't feel like camp. I've been coming for years,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't included. I didn't feel like I could be myself. It didn't feel like camp. I've been coming for years, been excited about this. And now, like my counselor, we didn't have devotions. We just skipped through it. I've got one parent here that said all they had was a short devotion time, and that was all the learning they did about God. Well, I know that the camp that this parent was writing about, they have Bible studies, they have worship, they have all these things. And so
Mm-hmm.
was it not happening? It just didn't feel like camp. And so these things that are expected can break down, and then that's where the camp experience itself breaks down. When we have deficiencies especially in multiple of these fundamental characteristics. And so that's kind of how we measure it, and we give that kind of that gray area in the middle where it's marginal, and we want to keep an eye on those, but we really want our campers to be in that robust experience because we can see in our measurements that it matters. It matters what kind of experience they had, not just whether they had fun or not, right? But specifically in these 5 fundamental characteristics, when they're robust, we see outcomes and we see people wanting to come back. And when they're deficient, we see totally different statistics.
I want to share another parent quote, in part because it those same things, and we're going to talk about kind of those consequences here in a minute, right? More specifically about here are some of these consequences of a deficient experience. This parent wrote, I wish we would have been notified about your social media presence. We found that on our own, looking for pictures of our daughter. Also, some follow-up on the main messages taught during camp would have been great. That would have made for some good discussion points at home. So I'm saying that mostly to add on that we know we know the camp experience lasts, right? We finally could measure that in this project. Camp experience goes home, one way or the other, right? And a lack of, in this case, it was kind of talking about this faith-centered piece that you had that other quote from. Well, parents would have loved to. These parents would have loved to know that. And again, this camp has, of course they do. They do Bible study. They had pretty solid ratings on faith being incorporated into other aspects of camp. And the parent was saying, gosh, I wish I would have known that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't assume that they have these structures in place at home. We can't assume that. I think camp directors used to assume they're going to church, so we're just a supplement to these things. We can't just assume those things. And we also can't assume that parents have the tools or feel equipped. And so when we have parents saying, this would be great, we want to know about this, those are some of the follow-up things. And we've talked about that multiple times on this podcast before. And so you can see that the deficiencies can be in different areas. We want to focus specifically today with the deficiencies at camp, the experience at camp, because we really see in the data from Effective Camp, but also from ACA's big youth impact study, and a whole bunch of other studies, that the quality of the experience matters more than everything else. Philosophy is important. Quality counselors are important. The follow-up stuff is important. The partnerships are important. Nothing outdoes the quality of the experience itself. That is the biggest predictor on whether we're going to have outcomes or not. And that's why we lean into the 5 fundamentals so much. That's our framing at Sacred Playgrounds of what camp needs. What are the fundamental characteristics? What, when you boil camp down, you say is the most important. And those are the 5 fundamentals. And that's why we lean into these so much, because it really speaks to the quality of the experience. And that's what we're looking for, is a high quality experience leading to fun, lasting outcomes, impacts on churches, impacts in the home, and a desire to return.
Last summer, I watched a canoe tip at a camp waterfront. The staff knew exactly what to do. Flip the canoe, steady it, climb back in, begin to bail. That's what resilience looks like in our world. But for many camp directors, it feels like we're treading water. Staffing, parents, finances, board meetings, without a plan to flip that canoe. That's why we created the Resilient Camp Blueprint Diagnostic. It helps you see where the leaks are and where your team already has strength, so you can keep ministry at the center without drowning in overwhelm. I'm Travis from GoCamp Pro. You might remember me from being a guest here on Sacred Playgrounds last year. I've walked these paths and I know the strain. Take the free diagnostic at camp.mba/sacred. Again, that's camp.mba/sacred.
Jared, back with you. Listen, this is a timely one. We wanted to let you know that the publishers have put the Sacred Playgrounds book at a 50% off sale right here for this last week of November 2025. So if you're listening in this chunk of time, listening kind of within this first week, and you haven't gotten a chance to read Sacred Playgrounds, we've been talking about the 5 fundamentals, and that this breaks those 5 fundamentals down, shares a lot from the initial project, along with updated numbers, and there's some camp history pieces and lots of what can we do from there. And so the book is on sale through November 30th. Here's how you access this discount. Go to the link in the show notes, head to whiffandstock.com, click on Sacred Playgrounds, and you're going to use the code CONFSHIP. We'll drop that on the show notes as well. CONFSHIP. Use that code at checkout. You'll get 50% off. If you select media mail, shipping's also free. So this is the best chance for you, for your team. We dropped in a few ideas for folks to maybe it's a gift for your team or a book study that you do with your board. Maybe some other creative ideas to use this. And so if you're listening in these days, make sure you take advantage of that sale. All right. So should we take a few minutes and talk more about what happens when there are some of these deficiencies?
Absolutely.
What happens? What are the consequences when we've got a breakdown, right? So we know, we ask all these questions, we know that these different things can cause these. We've given a couple examples from parents about things that might cause a low rating, a breakdown. So when something breaks down in one of these fundamentals, what happens? What are the consequences of those breakdowns happening?
I mean, the consequences they can be many. I would see 3 major, kind of domains of consequences. One, the experience itself suffers. And so when there's a deficiency in the camp experience, the experience itself suffers. We can feel it. We can see it in the air, right? The counselor or the summer leaders aren't feeling as good about the way things went. It affects other campers. It affects the community, right? It kind of brings people down, and it can lead to counselor burnout as well. And so the experience itself suffers. We see that in that fun variable, right? And so I said we measure these things in the camper survey when we see a deficiency compared when we see robust experiences. So when we see the robust experiences, it's 97, 98, 99% are agreeing I had fun at camp. When it's a deficient experience, and we measure that in more than one of these 5 fundamentals, those that are agreeing that they had a lot of fun, it's less than half. And so when we just look at those data points, I had a lot of fun, and we just look at those who strongly agree I had a lot of fun. If they had a robust experience, 91% strongly agree with that statement, and another 7 or 8% somewhat agree. So it's 98, 99% agree. 91% strongly agree with that statement. If they had a deficient experience, 36% strongly agree with that statement. So some of them are still having fun, but it's a third. I mean, when you think about that, I mean, this really speaks to the measurements and the validity of the measurements. We can see that it affects the experience itself. We weren't getting along, or I felt left out. It wasn't fun. I didn't have a good time at camp. Some of these campers might be back, but a lot of them won't. And that's another one of the consequences. So one, it affects the experience
Retention.
itself.
Yeah.
Two, it affects your camp. Because these campers that would normally be going home saying how much fun they had, how much they wanted to come back, they would be inviting friends to come with them. They're saying, I'm not sure I want to come back. And so you'll see a lower return rate among the campers that had the deficient experience. I mean, this is sort of obvious if we think about it, but this is a big deal. This is why we need to know about it. This is why we need to measure it, because it's not just the ones that you heard from that had some sort of terrible experience at camp that the parent called and said, what the heck are you doing with my kid? And you say, oh, I'm going to give you half off next year. I'll give you free camp, whatever it is. We're going to try to make this right. I'm so sorry. I'm going to fire this summer staff member who caused it, right? You respond to those things one-on-one. But you're not responding to each and every one of these other things because you don't hear about each and every one of them. And so it's so important to structure your camp in such a way that you can identify these things, that the staff are well trained so that these things don't happen to a large degree. And so it affects the experience itself, and it impacts the return. And so when we see the campers at the end of the week saying, I plan to attend this camp again, if they had a robust experience, 95% are strongly agreeing with that statement. The other 5% are somewhat agreeing. 95% strongly agreeing. If they had a deficient experience, it's 2/3. It's 64% strongly agreeing with that statement. So again, a lot of them still want to come back, but a lot of them don't. Okay, so you're really cutting that number that want to come back. And if it's a very deficient experience, they're telling others not to come. And the parents are telling others, don't send your kid here. And that's so it's affecting you. It's affecting the experience. It's affecting return rate. And third, but not least of all, the consequence is it's impacting your mission. It's impacting the outcomes. And so this is where we can really measure this. Because in the Effective Camp Project, we do this pre-post measurement. And we see, are the campers growing in things like their belief in God, their understanding that faith matters in their lives, their self-confidence, their leadership skills, all these things. And when it's a robust experience, we can see growth across the board from first day to last day. And we see that growth continues 2 to 3 months following camp when we do the follow-up survey. When we measure a deficient experience, what we see is one of two things. Either no growth, or in some cases, we actually see declines in these measurements. Specifically around self-confidence. So the camper's coming home feeling actually damaged. So a question like, I am happy about my life and who I am, we ask that question. To what extent do they agree with that statement? We'll actually see agreement levels decline from the first day to the last day of camp with something like, I am happy about my life, when we see a deficient experience at camp. We'll also see, and this is important, listen up, folks, we're talking about Christian camps here, right? It's no secret that you're a Christian camp. Remember that the campers are coming there in part because you're a Christian camp.
Yeah, on purpose.
The parents are choosing your camp on purpose. It's not an accident. They didn't stumble upon a Christian camp. They think, the vast majority of them, that you're going to do better in certain areas. A lot of them want their child to be exposed to faith, grow in their faith, things like that. And so they come there with high hopes and at least the understanding that this is Christian camp. And so when they have a deficient experience, when they experience it in a way that's harmful, that impacts their understanding of what the church is and the importance of faith in their lives. And that might not recover. And so this is something that's really important for us to remember. The deficient experience is tied up with our identity as faith-based camps.
Yeah,
So it wasn't
it
just I
is.
was treated poorly. I was treated poorly by Christians. And we'll see parent responses saying this. I expected more from a Christian camp.
From a Christian camp.
Yep. So they'll just jab it in. They'll let you have it, right? When they have a
Yeah.
rough experience. And so these are really serious consequences. And so just looking at some of the simple numbers when we see a deficient experience. So the question, I grew in my faith.
Right. Strengthened in my faith.
I was strengthened in my faith, or I grew in my faith. We ask it both ways. If it's a robust experience, 94% strongly agree with that statement, right? And again, the other 5 or 6% are somewhat agreeing.
Mhm.
If it's a deficient experience, 39%. So again, it cuts it down to a third. And so seeing those differences should really say, oh, wow, this matters.
That's a big gap.
And we see the same again with self-confidence when we measure from the first day to the last day. We either see no growth or that decline. We'll specifically see a decline if there's breakdowns in the relational, the fundamental characteristic of camp, or especially the safe space.
Safe
So
space.
if they feel like
right.
they were picked on or left out, especially if that confirmed something that they already thought about themselves, if they already saw themselves as an outsider, and they were an
Mhm.
outsider at this space that's supposed to be so welcoming and so inclusive, and proclaims that they're so welcoming and inclusive. Wow. Even at camp, even at the place that's the most welcoming, that's the most inclusive, I don't have a place. Maybe I don't have a place anywhere. Maybe I don't have a place in this so-called kingdom of God. This is where it gets heavy, you guys. And this is where we should take this really seriously, right? Because it has theological implications too for these campers. And this is the practical theology that we're teaching them. We're not just teaching them, good Lutheran theology or Methodist theology or evangelical covenant theology or whatever it is we're teaching at camp. We're teaching them through their experience, through their being. We care for you as God cares for you. We love as God loves us. And so if they feel the opposite of that and they experience the opposite of that, they can perceive their relationship with God in that way.
It's time for us to turn to what then shall we do, right? So when even before we deal, our first action step is, as you said, we've got to structure something. We've got to structure a way of getting insights into what's happening. We have to know. We got to find a way to know, right? So like things like if you're not surveying your parents, you need to survey your parents, right? Still lots of camps. The end of our insights into the camp experience is our 5-question end of week camper survey, right? That, again, we've said this here, like we got to know. We got to know more than that. We need to generate more insights than that. And so your end of week camper survey, yes, of course, do that. The questions that you ask there really matter. They make a difference. And we want to get to some of these things in those questions. Let us know, of
Yes.
course, if you need help figuring that out, whether it's like an actual project where we work together or, we have a system in place to just help you figure out what to ask on that. So we can talk about that. But your end of week camper surveys, and then if you're not getting insights from your parents, are two really key places that you need to generate those insights, and you need to ask some questions in a way that will help you get at these things beyond some simple scales of, thumbs up, thumbs down. Here was this specific thing. So that's call it number 1. Action step number 1, generate these insights. If we don't have them, we can't really do any of the rest, right?
This is why we do what we do, Jared. Like,
yeah, that's
both
true.
of us are camp professionals. We're ministry professionals. We served in the church. We served at camps. We love camp. Why are we still doing what we're doing? It's because we want camps to succeed. We want to bring some of these insights to you so that you can dive into these things and really understand how this experience works and how you can improve it. And so that's what we've dedicated our work to at Sacred Playgrounds, is really diving into these things and walking alongside you. And so there's key tools that you can do. Absolutely gather those insights. But here's the other thing: do a self-assessment. That's where we brought in this self-assessment tool. You can look at the 5 fundamentals. You can talk about how are we doing on Unplugged from Home? How are we doing on relational? How are we doing on faith-centered? How are we doing on safe space? How are we doing on participatory? Dive into each one of those and use our tool, use another tool, really talk through it, think through it, and look at different aspects of your program to make sure that you are setting the table for a robust experience for your campers and for your staff.
Yeah. All right. So let's say, Jake, let's give them a couple things here. We figure out we have a deficiency somewhere, and we figure out we've got these insights. We've uncovered that we've got something somewhere. What do we do about it? Where do we go?
So figuring out the root of it is really important. Okay. Is it because of a specific programmatic thing that you're doing? And so in the case of some camps, it is programmatic. There's an open time where kids are not supervised, for example, and they're getting left out. And so again, I talked about the big camps that I've been to where they're playing capture the flag and there's 300 kids playing at once, and the kids are off in their pods, and you cannot trust the kids to make sure that everybody is still there when you're playing a competitive game, because they're going to want to win, and one of the kids is going to say, just leave me behind. And they will leave that kid behind. I've seen it. And that kid is going to have a tough time because of that. And so making sure there's adequate supervision, making sure you're structuring your programs in a way that facilitate relational interaction, safe space, participatory, all these different things. Okay. So identifying the specific area. Sometimes it's free time and the counselors are just on the edges. They're not engaged enough. So a lot of this is training. How are you training your staff to make sure that they're leaning into these 5 fundamentals? One of the key ones for faith-centered is conversations about God and faith. How frequently are these happening? And so that's oftentimes a one that we see is lower frequency of these conversations. Sure, they might be doing Bible study. Sure, they might have worship. Do the counselors care? Does it matter to them? Are they trained to facilitate these conversations with campers? Are they trained to say, I don't know? That's a great question. Let's talk about that. Let's explore. Let's experiment together. Do you have resources for them to have these conversations? And so that's one of those key factors in the faith-centered piece. So it's not just, we do prayer before meals and we have worship every day, so therefore we're faith-centered. It's, are you training them to have these conversations so that they can continue them back home, right? So identifying that area and then establishing action steps. Okay, we've identified this area as a place of deficiency. Now, how can we address that in staff training? How can we address it programmatically?
Yeah, how do we intervene?
Is it something that we need to change the schedule for or change the way that we do a program? And this is where your leadership really, really matters. Being able to say, we're changing this for a specific reason. And it might be something that people say, we can't change capture the flag. We've always done capture the flag. It's the favorite activity at camp. You are going to run into things like that. We call them sacred cows at camp because people hold on to them so tightly and they're damaging to us, to our relationships with one another, and to our relationships with God. Sacred cows. And so how do we phase these things out? Use your leadership staff. When you dive in philosophically and you say, this is the why. Because when this happens, when we do this, safe space breaks down or relational breaks down in this way. And what we want to do is really lean into this and improve this, because by doing so, we'll have more fun, more kids will come back, and we'll accomplish our mission. Those 3 things, those are all things that we want to do. And your leadership staff, summer staff especially, will be on board with this. If you get them on board and they'll say, you're right, we've got to get rid of or change the way we do capture the flag or whatever. We got to stop doing pranks. We got to stop hazing our campers. These sorts of things that seem harmless to them because it happened to me or I did it and I had a great time. Yes, you're one of those that kept coming back and kept saying this was fun. You weren't one of the ones that felt left out or picked on because of that experience. You know what happened to those people? They didn't come back.
Right.
And they might not have come back to church either. So it's great that you're still here and that you had a great experience. That doesn't mean it's going to be a universally positive experience for these people. In fact, it might be the source of a deficient experience for 20% of our campers. And those are the sorts of things that we try to measure.
All right.
Go ahead,
So
Yep.
let's put a bow on what we do, right? So 1, we discover and uncover what things may be deficient, and The second part of this is asking why, and then asking why again, and then asking why again. That's part of what we were getting at. Don't to say that it happened. Why did it happen? Okay, why did that happen? Okay, why did that happen? So we discover and uncover the deficient experience. 2, we intervene, and those interventions are going to be almost always people or program, right? So training, equipping, connecting, or program, shifting, enhancing, changing part of it, right? Doesn't mean capture the flag has to go away. It means we got to put something in place to make sure that campers are included, safe, etc. So we uncover and discover, we intervene, and then the last step is to check again, to
Yes.
evaluate again,
Yep.
to make sure it worked, to see the difference that thing made. And those are our favorite stories in effective camp overall.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
All these stories, we tell them we learned this, so we did this. They went through a couple of these on the last episode. Hey, we
I was
learned
just
a
thinking
thing.
of that. Yeah, those
Right,
stories
Cam
that we
talked about
heard.
exactly.
Yes, that cell
Right.
phone
We
policy
learned a thing.
story from Rainbow Trail that Cam shared. That's a powerful story where Unplugged from Home was breaking down, and they were trying to figure out, can we even do this? They were letting the counselors have the phones. The campers wanted their phones because the counselors had the phone. And it wasn't that a whole bunch of them were having deficient experiences. It was that a few of them were. A few of them were longing for that technology. And it was impacting the counselors' attention on the campers. And so to hear him tell that story and the changes that it made and how positive it was just like, wow. They got people
to hear
on
the
board.
most connected staff they've ever had and most connected
Exactly.
community
It was
they've ever had.
if you didn't listen to that episode, listen back. Because we heard it even more when we talked with Cam and the staff of Rainbow Trail in person. But simple interventions based on philosophy, based on camper experience, and we say, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do it well? And they didn't just say we're going to just make a change, right? They went through it very systematically,
intentionally, and
and
brought
that's
people
a
along.
great example of how you can make a change effective.
Yeah. All right. We've got just a minute or two to get in our stat of the week.
Stat of the week. Stat of the week. Stat of the week.
All right. The stat of the week this week is an odds ratio again. And this time it is 10 times. 10
Woo.
times more likely. If campers have what we measure as a robust camp experience, they are 10 times more likely to report that they grew in their faith compared with those who had a deficient experience. That is a huge number. We seldom see odds ratios that high, but that speaks
statistically, like that's significant, right?
It's a big number. Yeah, I mean it's more than significant. I mean, when you say it's a factor of 10 difference. And what's crazy is we can run the other numbers too. And so when we run the I had fun number, that's almost 20 times. It's 19.1 times more likely to agree and strongly agree that I had a lot of fun compared with those who had a deficient experience. And with I want to return, it's almost 8 times more likely. It's 7.8 times more likely to strongly agree that I want to return to camp next year if they had a robust experience compared with a deficient experience. Wow. These really do matter. These categories really matter. So 10 times more likely to grow in faith, about 8 times more likely to want to come back, and 19 times more likely to say that they had fun.
Wow. Those are significant, and just kind of put an exclamation point on this idea that it matters for outcomes, for these really key outcomes, for these really key things that we want. Those consequences really do happen at a pretty big clip, depending on the kind of experience that they had.
And we've measured this, Jared, at multiple camps across the country, multiple denominations and traditions. And so these different cohorts that we have, we did a United Methodist cohort in 2022. Last year we did the Association of Covenant Camps cohort, and that's where these numbers specifically came from. And we ran the numbers again this year at the Presbyterian cohort. We've, of course, done camps in other denominations as well. But when we look at kind of these cohorts, we can really get a sense of what the trends are among those types of camps. And so these numbers specifically came from the Covenant camps from 2024.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Jake. All right, so there you have it, folks. We've broken down the breakdowns. It's something we share, in reports with cohorts like the ones Jake was talking about, individual camps that do this. We share these, and it brings up really interesting conversations, right? Because part of when people do work with us, we end up in conversation, right? It's not just, again, data for sake of data. Besides having this report in hand, we'll talk about those things. Are doing deeper breakdowns sometimes to identify, hey, was this a certain week or two, or was this with a certain group, or whatever it is, and that helps those interventions get specific, get powerful, get impactful that we might make. So you've got some ways to do this, folks, some ways to identify and some ways to make a difference, to intervene, to make a shift that can make a really big difference in your camper's experience. And that is highly, highly missional. That's what we are called to do, my friend.
We want you to succeed. We want your campers to have a wonderful experience and to have these outcomes that we're talking about. That's why we do what we do. And these things are more common than we think. We talked about the 97% have fun, but a lot of those that have fun, we can still measure these deficient experiences. In fact, in cohort after cohort, we see about 10% where we're measuring a deficient experience in the camp model. And so the vast majority are having these positive experiences, right? And they're growing in faith, and we see this growth. But when we see deficiencies in 10% of our campers, there are ways that we can improve the camp experience. It's not magic, folks. It's not magic. We have to do it well. And so work to improve your camp experience for the sake of your own camp, for the sake of the campers and staff that are there, and for the sake of the ministry partners that you serve. Thanks for your ministry. Thanks for improving. And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Be sure to hit that subscribe button to catch every new episode. If this is helpful for you and your organization and your team, follow the link in the show notes to become a supporter of the podcast. Our theme music was written and performed by Weekend Picnic. Find their original songs anywhere you get your music, or visit them at weekendpicnicband.com. Sacred Playgrounds is generating insights, equipping leaders, and connecting partners to help camping ministries thrive. Learn more about what we've got going on, view current research projects, and connect with our team at sacredplaygrounds.com.